If you're like me, when the Mandalorian series came out a few years ago, it reignited all of our love of the Star Wars series. Mandalorians were always really cool, but they didn't really get the screen time that they deserved in the movies. This series highlighted all the cool gadgets that Mandalorians have, while also showing how much honor and pride is within that culture. So if you like blasting your opponent with blasters, being fitted, fully armored in Beskar, and standing toe-to-toe with the most powerful Jedi in the universe, this is the deck for you. Greetings Internet, DDA here, and when I first started theory crafting decks for the new Set 2 Shadows of the Galaxy in Star Wars Unlimited, I did not expect to build the Mandalorian. I love the Mandalorian show, and I definitely had an interest in the leader. However, nothing really overly excited me about the leader. It wasn't until I played it in the pre-release that I fell in love, and just the playstyle of the Mandalorian, that mid-range aggressive playstyle. One of the things that I love about the Mandalorian is he gives you a lot of options to put pressure into the base. Because of his leader ability, the tapping and exhausting of your opponent's units when you play upgrades, this allows you to simultaneously build up your units to swing for big damage, while also providing the defense of the exhausting of your opponent's units. And quite literally, there are a lot of leaders in the game that are just hard countered by the Mandalorian. The best example is Rey. So if you have Rey running the show in a lot of your locals, I highly recommend playing the Mandalorian. I would consider the Mandalorian a soft counter to Rey decks because there's just so many options that you have for tapping down Rey. We'll get into some of the combos that you can do. But the first thing that I want to talk about is our choice to use the security complex over the 30 HP blue base. And the reason that we do this is because there are many reasons why. I wasn't completely sold on it until I played a few games. I did end up going 2-1 and 3-0 in the last two locals that I played with this deck. My only loss was to blue villain control, which is definitely a weakness of this deck. And we make several choices in the deck to combat the blue villain control matchup. But back to the security complex and why we play it. This deck does play a low number of units, relatively low. I think it's about 31 units. I'm at about 17 upgrades and only 2 events. And the reason we only play 2 events in here is because the Mandalorian is giving you those tricks that you would get from events. Like, you play your waylays, you play your relentless pursuits and things like that. Like, these are things to kind of manipulate the field and manipulate the units on the field. Well, the Mandalorian is giving you that field manipulation. So in order to kind of highlight that and really, really bring that home with this deck, we wanted to play an incredible number of upgrades to simultaneously push damage and give you defense. So back to the security complex again. The reason why we play is because we play so little units, only 31 units and only 12 2-drop units. Our units are very fragile. Namely, the Follower of the Way is a great example of how fragile that unit is. It's only a 1/3. It's incredibly easy for your opponent to trade into it and take it out before you can upgrade it. Well, that's where security complex comes in. It lets you stick an early unit and make sure you can start getting that upgrade train rolling early game as fast as possible, so your opponent can't just easily remove it with a unit. That's why security complex, I'm completely sold, especially with Follower of the Way. Like I said, mainly in here to keep that unit on the field, so that way we can start upgrading it. So as you would expect with a Mandalorian upgrade deck, we play a ton of upgrades. We're going to go into those later in the video, but to start out with the units, we're going to talk about all the units that we play. We play a bunch of 2-drops. I think our early game units in this deck are really, really important. You know, the late game bombs in this deck are very niche. They're very specific to the situation that you're in. We'll get into that a little bit as we talk about it. But to start out here, our first 2 drop, we're going to be running 3 Restored Arc. These guys are a standard bread and butter for blue. Really good ship unit. I call this the blue A-Wing. It doesn't do as much damage as A-Wing, but it does offer the Restore 1. And we do play several upgrades in this deck that can go on space units and vehicles. So we're not, because a lot of upgrades are non-vehicle. That's a very common line of text to have on upgrades. So we'll talk, when we get to the upgrade section, we'll talk about the upgrades that actually can go on your vehicles. And the Restored Arc is a great target to put a few upgrades on to make it bigger and badder, and then just be able to run into the opponent for a lot of value. Next up, we have 3 copies of the Clan Ren Rescuer. This is a very, very strong early game unit. It gives you a lot of options. It gives an experience token when it enters play, and this gives you some combos that you can do. You can focus on buffing up 1 unit. Of course, with the Protector of the Throne, it gives you an option to give that Sentinel. It allows you to buff your leader on the Mando deploy turn. It also can buff itself to be a 2/3. You know, a 2/3 for 2 Mandalorian is just kind of a standard bread and butter unit. So this unit is solid. Mainly it's in here for the option to buff a bigger unit that you're building up with upgrades, but also in a pinch, it can serve as that, that equipment upgrade unit itself. It's also a Mandalorian for this synergy. Next, we have 3 Followers of the Way. This card is cornerstone to the deck. When it's upgraded, it becomes a 2/4. It is a fragile unit at 1/3 when it is not upgraded, which is one of the main reasons why we run Security Complex in here, to protect it, to make sure that we can get at least 1 upgrade. One of my favorite plays with the Follower of the Way, just to talk about the Follower of the Way for a little bit, it is really important for you to have initiative. When you have initiative with this deck, dropping down Follower of the Way is one of the best plays that you can do. One of my favorite plays with Follower is to play down Follower of the Way when I have initiative, resource a Hotshot Blaster, and then smuggle it out turn 2 to tap down your opponent's turn 1 play, and then swing for 4. You know, he becomes a 4/4 then at that point. Incredibly powerful to do that. Very, very strong. Follow the Way. It takes a little bit to get used to playing him. He is very powerful, but he is also, he can die. So you need to make sure you play around him and make sure you're being a little bit cognizant, and you're being a little bit, you're thinking about when you're playing him. Next up, we have a unit. So there are not enough Mandalorians in this color scheme for you to play all Mandalorian units. So we have to play some non-Mandalorians, and the first non-Mandalorian unit we are playing is L337. I think this unit is just incredible in this deck. As a 2-drop, a 2/2 shielded, what you mainly want in this deck when you drop your early units is you want your units to stick. You want your units to stick around so that way you can upgrade them. If your opponent manages to clear all your units off the board, that takes away so much power from this deck and pretty much will lose you the game. Well, L337 helps you keep units on the board in 2 ways. Not only is it a 2/2 shielded if you drop it down, but also if your opponent is using a lot of capture effects, you can save one of your units from capture. This card is not in here because of the saving from capture. It is a nice nuance and a nice to have in certain matchups. Mainly it's in here because it's dropped down as a 2/2 shielded. It's a very sticky unit you can drop at 2. And then likewise, it does have a smuggle for 4 that can give you that extra consistency. If you're drawing too much early game, you can just resource it, and then potentially later in the game, after you've had several rounds of removal thrown at you, you can play this guy out to kind of restabilize yourself. Another 2-drop I did try in here was Val. I tried out Val for a while over the L3. Val, I found, had too much counterplay associated with her, and my opponent was able to 2-for-1 me too often. So I switched to L337, and he's just been great in here and has been a staple and a standard of this deck. So very, very strong unit there. Now, moving into the 3-drops, we do go relatively light on 3-drops, especially relatively light compared to what I've done in other decks, because most often when, your turn 2 is going to involve you playing an upgrade. So that usually involves an upgrade for 2 or an upgrade for 1 or an upgrade for 3. So that's why we go a little bit light on the 2-drops, because ideally you would want to play an upgrade turn 2. So that means that we don't necessarily need a 3-drop to play, a 3-drop unit to play on curve. But these Protector of the Thrones are so powerful in this deck. Another great target for the security complex, making sure it has Sentinel and then giving it a shield to have that resilience of the Sentinel. I am often building up Protector of the Throne with upgrades. Very strong unit to do so because, it kind of doubles down on your defense. You're simultaneously exhausting your opponent's units, and then also they have the Sentinel that they have to get through as well. Potentially with the shield, dropping a Mandalorian armor on it would be excellent. This card is so strong. I wish I could play 5 of it. Next up, for our 3-drop, we have 2 of the Mandalorian Warriors. These are strong units, and they do offer combos. It's a good unit on its own. 3 for 3/3, +1 experience to a Mandalorian unit is just solid. I do only play it at 2 because, again, sticking units in this deck is difficult sometimes. So I only wanted to play 2 of it because I am sometimes in situations where I need to drop down this unit and not get the experience with it, and I just need to drop this unit just to have a body on board that I can start upgrading. So in those instances, it feels weak. So that's why it's only at 2, because there are instances where this doesn't line up, but when it does line up, it feels incredible. Now, moving into the 4-drops, I'm going to start with Kira as the start of the 4-drops. So now, being that this is a tall strategy where you're going to be building up either 1 or 2 units to be incredibly tall with upgrades, that offers a lot of counterplay to you, namely in blue and in blue villain. Blue villain decks with Power of the Dark Side, blue in general with Rivals Fall and Vanquish. There's a lot of that we have to dance around in this deck, especially on the deploy turn. Ideally, you would like to see your opponent's hand before you deploy the Mandalorian so you can more safely do it. Well, Kira helps you do that. Kira is just a great, solid unit. The great thing about her is the +3 goes on every card. There's 2 things that's great about her. The +3 goes on every copy of the card that you name. So that means that if your opponent has multiple copies of that card in their hand, that doesn't matter. You name it, and then all of them are +3. The other thing that's great about Kira is that card doesn't actually need to be in their hand. So let's say that, I'm on my deploy Mando turn, I drop Kira, and I am afraid of Rivals Fall. I know my opponent plays Rivals Fall. Well, even if they don't have that Rivals Fall in their hand, you could still name Rivals Fall as a precursor, as like a protector for your opponent drawing it in the future. So Kira, definitely one of the best cards for combating the blue villain decks. Definitely one of the worst matchups that this deck has. So this is needed. We do also play the 3rd copy in the sideboard for that matchup. Next up, going further into our 4-drops, we have 2 copies of Rose. Now, this card I've gone up and down on, up and down. I've been testing it in Luke. I've been testing it in Mando. I've gone from 3 to down to 1 copy to 0 copies up to 2. I've tested this card a lot. It is very particular what deck this goes in. The crazy thing about the Mandalorian is I feel like Mandalorian tribal decks, and specifically this blue Mandalorian deck, generate shields at a higher frequency than even Luke Skywalker does. It's kind of crazy. There's so many Mandalorian cards that generate shields for you. So that makes actually Rose better in the Mandalorian than Luke Skywalker, actually, I feel. The other reason why Rose is amazing in this deck is Rose is so slow. especially without ECL. Rose is incredibly slow. Like, even if you had ECL, I'm not sure you would want to blow ECL on Rose. But the fact that you have to just kind of throw her down and then just kind of wait. And then even when you get to the next turn, like when you can swing with her, it gets kind of awkward because, like, let's say I have a shield on Mando and I want to buff him up. Well, then I kind of need to swing with Rose first to buff him up. And then that's leaving Mando open and vulnerable to, you know, an exhaust effect, a Rival's Fall, some disruption, them playing a Sentinel. There's a lot of ways that you can disrupt this Rose play that makes it really slow. But when it does work out, it is incredibly powerful. Like I said, there is a lot of shield generation in this deck. Rose combos very, very well with Jetpack. Jetpack is a temporary shield. So Rose allows you to take that temporary shield and turn it into permanent damage. Very strong. Rose herself is also a very sticky unit. 2/6 shielded, very, very sticky for 4. So she allows you to then also stick units and start upgrading. Very strong. I had her at 1 for a while, but I upped her to 2 because she's been performing very well in this deck. Closing out our 4 drops, we have 3 copies of Razor Crest. You might be asking yourself why we're playing 3 copies of this card. The answer is because your units will get answered. Your units will die, and the units that die are going to have 1 to 3 upgrades on them. Especially because there's a lot of upgrade hate in the meta. Like, there are a lot of red decks running around that are running Fang Fighters. They're going to destroy your Darksabers. They're going to destroy your Mandalorian armors. They're going to destroy things, and Razor Crest is going to come in for you and get those back into your hand and allow you to combo more. The other thing is this is a Mandalorian unit. It counts as a Mandalorian, so it enables experience from Darksaber, shields from the Armorer. Very strong unit. I do resource it a lot because sometimes I don't have upgrades in my discard pile, but I use it enough and get enough upgrades back that I do feel it's justified at 3 copies. Also, this deck goes light in space. The only space that we play are Restored Arc and Razor Crest, which I feel we can get around with the exhausting from the Mandalorian. So, I just 3 copies on this just because it enables the combos of the deck. Going now more into our late game units, we have 2 copies of the Armorer. This card is on the line of win more. You do need other units in play, other built-up units in play for this to be usable. The one thing I do like about it is on the Mandalorian deploy turn, if you deploy Mando, you can, so then, the Armorer costs 5, so that leaves you 1 resource on the Mandalorian deploy turn to potentially play one of our 1-cost upgrades, like Snapshot Reflexes. So that's a good combo to do on the Mandalorian deploy turn. You'll get that 1 exhaust. You'll be able to throw down Armorer, shield Mando, shield the Armorer herself, and then potentially shield another unit. I would say as long as you're getting 2 shields with the Armorer, it's decent to play the Armorer. It's not bad. But because it needs to line up, like as we get into our late game units, you're going to see a lot of these are good in very specific situations. That's why we don't play like 3 of it, because we need those situations to line up for it to be good. But the Armor, when it hits hard. It hits real hard. Those shields will really disrupt your opponent. So I like it at 2. Now going into our late game units, the late game unit that I feel that is massively overperforming for me is Fen Rao. This card is spectacular. I can't overstate how strong it is. Being only an uncommon, and I'm going to talk about this, we're getting into the point where we have legendaries. Like, we do play a single copy of Luke Skywalker and 2 copies of the Mandalorian. But if you don't have these, Fen Rao is strong enough to carry the weight of this deck on his back. He is incredibly powerful. There are just so many combos that you can do with Fen. His ability gives you a make an opening -2/-2 when you play an upgrade. So if you don't know, when you play Fen, you can play an upgrade from your hand and it costs 2 less. So if you drop Fen on the 6th turn, You can play like a Mandalorian armor, you can play like a snapshot or a jetpack from your hand or something like that, and then attach it to Fen, get the -2/-2, and the exhaust from Mando. Very, very strong. So it's kind of almost taking out 2 units for you on a single play. Very strong. Additionally, a combo that you can do with Fen is Fen can actually, because the Mandalorian and Fen are both when played abilities, you can choose the order of them, the -2/-2 and the exhausting. So Fen can actually enable you to get a unit within the threshold of the Mandalorian exhaust, either the 4 from the leader side or the 6 from the flipped deployed side. So that just makes Fen just so versatile in this deck. 5/6, great stat line for 6. Like I said, if you don't have copies of the legendaries that we're about to go over, I would absolutely recommend you going to 3 Fens. I have often contemplated going to 3. The only reason why it's not at 3 is because it does need that 2-cost upgrade in your hand for it to be good. So, you know, it has to line up for you. Again, that's a common theme for all these top-end units in this deck. This has to line up, but when it does line up, you will swing the whole game. Closing out our units, the final units that we're playing are 2 copies of The Mandalorian. A decent stat line at 5/6. I often compare this guy to Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has 1 more power than Obi-Wan and has a when played ability versus a when defeated ability. The when played ability is pretty decent on The Mandalorian. If you manage to get your early game units to survive with a bunch of upgrades, it can win you the game, putting that double shield on them. I have done that in several matchups. It helps more in some matchups versus others, depending on how much removal that they play. But it can be very strong. Like I said, it's a very niche card. A lot of times this is not lining up for you. At a minimum, though, this is a decent statted Sentinel that you can drop down. Also, you can play the Mandalorian rifle on the unit Mando. So that's worthy to note there as well, that this unit enables you to continue to use the Mandalorian rifle to capture even if they defeat your leader. So that's definitely worthy to note there. But I definitely wouldn't run more than 2 of this in here. It's very niche, so it feels good at 2. And honestly, the only reason why I'm running 2 of it is just because of the interaction with Mandalorian rifle. Otherwise, it would just be too inconsistent, I feel. The final unit that we play is our single copy of Luke Skywalker. I like this in here at a single copy. It's definitely not needed. Single copy of Luke Skywalker, absolutely not needed. I like it as a random I win the game card. Sometimes you'll get into late game, and that's the other thing about this deck. Being that this is a mid-range deck, once you get to about 6 resource, once you get to that 6 deploy, that 6 resource, you pretty much stop resourcing altogether, which is why we are playing very, very, very little top-end units, just this single copy of Luke Skywalker, because often you're gonna need to extend yourself to even play this unit. I don't really often go to 7 resources in this deck. Usually when you get to 6, you're drawing 2, and then you're going like unit play upgrade, and you're really trying to push out the last damage that you need to seal the game. But to play this deck on theme with Luke Skywalker does save Mandalorian, the Mandalorian in the end of Season 2. So we have to play that single copy of Luke Skywalker, so he senses Grogu and he comes and saves him. Now, going into the most important part of the deck, the upgrades. The upgrades are incredibly important, and the first thing I'm going to talk about with the upgrades are our 1-cost upgrades. The 1-cost upgrades in this deck are just so important because they allow you to simultaneously play an upgrade and play a unit in that turn, especially on turn 2, because you can go 1-cost upgrade and then a 2-drop. Just very, very strong, these 1-cost upgrades. Like, you wouldn't think that Foundling is a good card, and I'm telling you right now, we do not play Foundling for the effect. We can use the effect. I have used the effect, like to put Foundling on Rose, or put Foundling on a Restored Arc. Make it a Mandalorian unit so that way that armor can shield it. It gets experience from Darksaber. Or even, like, you can equip Darksaber. So, like, because we play Darksaber in here, and, you know, it's out of aspect in green, but you don't get the penalty when you're attaching it to Mandalorians. Well, you could put Foundling on something and then circumvent that aspect penalty. But the main reason we play it in here is just because it is literally a one-cost, 1/1 upgrade that allows us to exhaust. There are combos that it enables, but that's not the main reason we play it, and that's why we have Snapshot at 3. Snapshot is so incredible. Huge tempo swing to be able to simultaneously attack and exhaust a unit. Just incredible cards. These one-cost upgrades are so powerful in this deck. I have considered going to 2 Foundling, just because the one-cost upgrades are so powerful. I'm on the fence. I'm almost adding... We're at 17 upgrades. That's a lot. So that's the only reason why I'm not doing it. Upping it to the 2 Foundlings. But continuing on with the upgrades, we have 3 jetpacks. This is probably one of the strongest upgrades in the deck. You can smuggle it for 4. Smuggling upgrades is just so strong, because it counteracts the detriment to upgrades, which is, you know, it's very easy for your opponent to 2-for-1 you when you're playing upgrades. So the smuggle mechanic allows you, it serves as a form of card draw. So smuggling upgrades is definitely the best course for you because it gives you that card advantage. The temporary shield for jetpack is so good. It allows you to trade into your opponent's sentinels free of charge. It allows you to get free triggers on rows. It lets you kill leaders, or just, you know, enable you to play safer that turn. Like, if you just want to make sure you're going to get in that damage, just put the shield on a unit and then go to town. Jetpack is so strong. I wish I could play more of it. Next up, we have Mandalorian armor for our upgrades. You can see here how much shield generation this deck has. Mandalorian upgrade, Mandalorian armor gives a shield. Jetpack gives a shield. This deck has so much shielding. Incredible card here. I love throwing this on Protector of the Throne. Making Protector of the Throne a 3/7 with the Sentinel with the shield. Huge. Your opponent has to jump through hoops to get rid of that unit or get around that unit. Very strong. Love throwing Mandalorian armor on Mando. It's a good supplement to the Mandalorian rifle, because the Mandalorian rifle only gives 3 power and no HP. So this gives 1 power and 3 HP. So it's a good, like, you know, mirror. It's kind of married together with the Mandalorian rifle, because, you know, it gives you that even spread of your stats and an extra shield. Very strong upgrade there. Next up, we have 3 copies of the DL, the Hot Shot DL Blaster. Now, we're not playing red, so obviously we are always smuggling this out for 3. That is how we're always playing it. We are quite literally never playing this from hand for 3. No reason to. The Hot Shot Blaster, it gives you 6 options. You have 6 options for automatically attacking with upgrades. You know, you have the 3 snapshots and the 3 Hot Shot Blasters. We also have 6 options for smuggle upgrades. A lot of versatility with this deck. The Hot Shot Blaster has been a premium, a very strong card in here. Now, I did not buy a starter deck, so I do not have 3 copies of the Mandalorian rifle. So right now I'm actually slotting in a Vamp Brace grapple shot to serve as my replacement for the Mandalorian rifle. But this should be 2 copies of the Mandalorian rifle in here. And the reason we play it at 2 instead of 3 is because we have 2 upgrades in here that you're not really going to want to play on anyone but your Mandalorian leader. The Mandalorian rifle is the first one, and then Darksaber is the second one. So I didn't want to play like 5 or 6 upgrades that you were going to have to wait for you to deploy your leader. I wanted to make sure that I was getting my upgrades on the early units, presenting threats to my opponent, and not waiting too long to start pushing in damage. So that's why we're only running 2 of the Mandalorian rifle, but I'm showing you a good replacement. Like let's say you didn't have 3 copies of the Hot Shot Blaster, you could run some of the Vamp Brace Grapple Shots in place of that. It is a great card for you to play to fill in extra equipment that you don't have, or let's say you didn't have Darksaber. Again, you could fill in copies of the Vamp Brace in its place. A great card to kind of fill out this deck until you get copies of everything that you need. But the Mandalorian rifle is great. Combos with the Mandalorian allows you to capture late game Sentinels that your opponent is playing down to try to slow you down. Capture those Sentinels and push in the damage. Closing out our upgrades, now we have 2 copies of Darksaber. I tried playing this at 3. It was too much at 3 because every time I've played, there have been 2 or 3 times where I've played this upgrade not on the Mandalorian leader. And every single time I've not played it on the Mandalorian leader, it has been answered. That unit has been answered. So 9 times out of 10, you do want to play it on the Mandalorian leader, which is why it's only at 2, because you have to wait for that 6 deploy. But I have played it on other units and gotten some value out of it. So I'm not too afraid to play it on other Mandalorians, but I would just say I would caution you to do that. Like, that's an advanced play of this deck. Don't do that unless you're sure that you can get it to stick, or you're really trying to kind of force your opponent into playing around you, kind of almost assuming that your opponent is going to remove it. Consider that. But, this is the strongest upgrade in the deck. 4/3, push in the damage, give experience to all your other Mandos, attach the Foundling to another unit like Rose to give her that experience. And then the only event that we are running in this deck is 2 copies of Spark of Rebellion. This, if there's going to be one event that I'm playing in this deck, it's going to be Spark of Rebellion, because that enables me to fish out Rival's Fall. It enables me to deploy Mando safely on the 6 deploy turn. This card is incredibly important in the blue matchup, incredibly important in the villain blue matchup. It's a great card. We had the 3rd copy in the sideboard for the blue matchup. Again, Rival's Fall is the bane of this deck, so we're going to play Kira, we're going to play Spark of Rebellion to combat that Rival's Fall. Now, going into the sideboard, the first thing I want to talk about before I talk about what you're going to sideboard in for the aggro, mid-range, and control matchup is that the ratio of the units to non-units in this deck is very fragile. Okay, we play 17 upgrades, 2 events, that is 19 non-units. That means that if you start messing with the ratios and start adding in a bunch of events from your sideboard, you are going to break the ratio of the deck, and you are going to have instances where you just have no units. So you always want to be aware of what you're taking out versus what you're adding in, and that you're keeping ratios similar. You want to make sure that you're either maintaining the unit ratio or you are adding more units in, because an upgrade in your hand without a unit on board is a useless upgrade. So that's the first thing I want to mention. Always be aware of that ratio, and do not break that unit ratio. In fact, exceed it whenever possible. So to start out here, what you're going to add for the aggro matchup, in the sideboard, we're running 2 Spare the Targets, 2 Bamboozles, and then additionally, we are running 2 Village Protectors. So in the aggro match, a lot of times, a lot of the aggro decks are playing equipments and upgrades now. Sabine, Kylo Ren, these decks are deploying their leader on turn 3 on 4 resource, and then attaching a Darksaber to that leader. Well, our answer for that is Bamboozle. Tap down Sabine, tap down Kylo Ren, and then return that Darksaber to hand is a massive hit to their tempo. It not only takes them back 1 turn, but it actually makes them lose 2 turns. Because then their next turn, they have to actually replay that Darksaber if they want to get value out of it. Likewise, Spare the Target is great for slowing down aggro decks. In aggro, I may not add Spare the Target. It depends. Because, again, the unit ratio, you need to be aware of that. And this deck does have a really good matchup against aggro because of the exhausting. So you may not need Spare the Target. Mainly, Spare the Target is for equipment and experience decks, or decks that play big Sentinels. But there is a big chance that you're going to want to throw that Spare the Target in against aggro, depending. But like I said, mainly in here, Spare the Target is for the equipment and upgrade decks, experience decks, and then if they play big Sentinels like Chewie or Obi-Wan, or the several villain Sentinels that are coming out, the shielded Sentinels, that's in here for that. Likewise, we are running Village Protectors as a additional shielded Sentinel, a very sticky unit. This can allow you to protect your Mando in a lot of instances against aggro. Village Protectors is a great answer to Wrecker. Village Protector takes Wrecker like a champion. It really does. It takes Poe like a champion too. Like, Poe and Wrecker ECL, they need to really exhaust a lot to get through the Village Protector. It's great, especially if you still have your security complex and you can double shield it. It's great. And then likewise, another reason why we have this Village Protector in the side is because we want to maintain that unit ratio. So if we're adding in like Spare the Target, we need to also add in a Village Protector to make sure we're maintaining that ratio. So things that you would take out against aggro, you would drop the Spark of Rebellions, drop those out. That's pretty easy. You would consider dropping out some of your late game units. Like I have dropped out the Luke Skywalker, the Mandalorians. I've dropped out those. I've dropped out an armor or two. Again, like we want to kind of reduce our curve because aggro decks are going to be hitting us hard turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, way before we get these units on board. So we want to reduce our curve, play those Bamboozles, Spare the Targets, and the Village Protector to reduce our curve to try to meet them in the early game and then exceed them in the mid to late game. Now, against mid-range decks, depending on the mid-range deck, I would consider adding in the third copy of Spark of Rebellion. I would also considering adding in the third copy. This is supposed to be Mandalorian Rifle. I would consider adding the third copy of Mandalorian Rifle. It really depends on the mid-range deck that you're going against. Like if you're facing Rey, I would probably add the Mandalorian Rifle. I would probably not add the Spark because Reys tend to go very, very unit heavy. Very, very unit heavy in Rey. So if you're facing Rey, I would go like the Mandalorian Rifle. I would add in the Bamboozles. I would add in the Spare the Targets. And then I would probably add in Village Protector. You can add in a lot in the mid-range matchup. For sure. You can add in all these. What I would take out, I would potentially take out Spark of Rebellion again. Depending. It really depends. Like, Rey, I would not add this in. Against like a green villain mid-range, I would add in the third copy of Spark. Because you want to take out, like, they're like Mauls, they're OBs, and things like that. What I would remove, again, I would consider dropping top end. Like these top end units. Because they don't help you until super late game, right? Yeah, that's a big one. So against, like, the control decks, the blue villain control decks, definitely add your third copy of Spark of Rebellion. Definitely add your third copy of Kira. Additionally, I would consider adding the Mandalorian Rifle. Because the control decks are playing a lot of Sentinels. The Mandalorian Rifle is an excellent answer to Sentinels. Because they'll drop down the Sentinel and it'll be exhausted, right? So, like, they'll try to disrupt your play. You'll have the Mandalorian be big. They'll like drop down a big Sentinel thinking they gotcha. And then you'll just go, okay, Mandalorian Rifle, I'll capture that Sentinel. It's already exhausted. I'll exhaust your other unit that you didn't attack with because you wanted to drop the Sentinel. And then I'll just go to town on you. Another card that I'm really liking in here, and I'm actually even considering adding this into the main deck. I add this in against control decks. In games you're going to go long, I am finding that this deck runs out of gas. It really needs a form of card draw. And Zori Bliss is such a great late game card draw engine, mainly because it has Smuggle. So if you draw it if you draw it early game, you could just resource it and then smuggle it late game. And what's interesting about the smuggle mechanic is smuggle is making one-ofs a lot better in this game, and I think that's shown here with the single copy of Zori Bliss in the sideboard, because a one-of is much better when you can possibly smuggle it. So like if you draw it when you don't need it, the fear is like, okay, I'm going to resource it and then I'm going to never see it again because it's a one-of. Well, with the smuggle mechanic, that's not true because I can smuggle this out for 6. Zori is just such an excellent card because her smuggle is only +1 compared to her normal cost. Additionally, Zori dodges both Fell the Dragon and Takedown, which is a nuance there that makes her incredible against blue decks, which is why I side her in again in the blue matchup, like the blue villain matchup she's going in. Because you want that card draw to kind of fuel you late game. A very good card. I'm considering adding a second one either to the side or a one copy to the main deck. And then what you're going to take out against blue villain, you want to drop some upgrades. You do. I would say the upgrades that you probably want to drop are... what upgrades should you drop? Maybe the Mandalorian... no, not the Mandalorian's rifle. Maybe Darksaber, I'll be honest with you. I know it sounds crazy to drop Darksaber, but it's just such a high cost, and you're not... It's like the chances of you getting this unit to stick are very, very low. You're probably not going to get this unit to stick, so I would consider dropping Darksaber. I would consider dropping like a copy of Mandalorian's armor. You're going to want to drop just a few upgrades because getting units to stick is far more important than you playing upgrades in the blue villain matchup. So that's pretty much it for the deck profile video. I hope you enjoyed this video. This deck is incredibly fun to play. It's also incredibly powerful. I'm already winning weekly local events with this. And I just think it's very strong. No one's really talking about the Mandalorian right now. And I think that's a detriment to the personality, a detriment to the Mandalorian creed. It's so strong, and I highly recommend if you like the Mandalorian series, if you like Mandalorians in general, and you like playing upgrades and tricks, this deck is just perfect for you. Incredibly fun, incredibly powerful. It's one of my favorite decks in the new set. So if you like this video, please hit that like button. Please hit subscribe for the best gaming guides and deck profile videos. And as always, turn your dial to Random Number Gaming for weekly updates on Star Wars Unlimited.